These are some of the pictures I've taken over the last couple of years with my iPhone 14 Pro Max. And a lot of my friends ask me how I'm able to take such clean looking photos with only my phone. So in this video, I'll be covering everything you need to know from basic settings to more advanced tips to help you capture amazing photos as well. Now of course, the iPhone 15 released last year, which has a couple of minor new features, but this guide should cover pretty much everything you need to know to take great pictures on iPhone 13 Pro onwards. So let's get straight into it and kick off with the camera settings I use on my phone. If I go to settings and then camera, you'll see my video settings are to record in 4K at 30 frames per second, so that I get really sharp, natural looking video. I also like to keep enhanced stabilization on, so that my video is steady, and turn HDR video off. I don't really like the HDR effect on iPhone. It seems to give videos quite a harsh looking, bright look, and sometimes makes them overly defined, so I like to turn that option off. I keep slow-mo at 1080p at 240 frames per second. I don't really use cinematic mode, so keep that at 1080p as well. Changing this to 4K will give you great looking footage, but I recommend only doing this if you have an iPhone with 256GB of memory or more, because as you can see, a minute of cinematic video is approximately 170 MB at 4K 30 frames per second. There are a lot of important settings and formats as well. I use high efficiency instead of most compatible when taking pictures. The difference between the two is that high efficiency image file format or HEIF offers better compression and retains more detail, making it a great choice for preserving image quality while saving storage space, whereas most compatible saves images in JPEG format, which is widely compatible and might be more suitable for sharing with non-Apple devices. Next, you want to turn the Pro RAW and resolution control toggle on, and make sure the Pro default is Pro RAW Max. And this will allow you to choose whether or not you want to shoot in RAW in your camera app. And I'll come on to the difference between normal pictures and RAW a little later on. I don't adjust the preserve settings, as I think these are quite good by default, and keep the next 4 toggles under the default options as well. Under composition, I make sure the grid is turned on, and this is really helpful when taking photos because it lets you follow the rule of thirds. This is a fundamental principle in photography and involves dividing your image into a 3x3 grid, and the idea is to place key elements of your composition along these lines or at their intersections, rather than centering them. And this typically helps create more visually interesting and balanced compositions compared to centering your subject. Then I keep the level on, mirror front camera off, and view outside the frame on. I like to think the less the phone has to interfere and process your images, the better, so I don't touch the photographic styles option and shoot in the standard mode. The last 3 toggles are also on, and the most useful of these is the macro control toggle, which will let you switch this mode on and off from the camera app, which you'll see later on is really useful. Now, if we go to the camera app, you'll see a few extra features have been added to your camera. Up in the top right, you have the RAW Max option, which we just added, which is currently switched off. Turning this on lets you shoot your pictures in 48 megapixel RAW, rather than the standard 12 megapixel HEIF. But what is RAW? When you capture an image in RAW mode, the camera records all of the data from the camera sensor without processing it, and that results in a file with the maximum amount of information and detail possible. And this is typically how professionals take pictures on DSLR or mirrorless cameras. This differs from formats like HEIF or JPEG, where the iPhone applies processing such as white balance adjustments, sharpening, and compression to the image before saving it. That means a RAW image will be much more detailed than a standard picture, but the image size will be a lot larger, and it will require editing to get the best colors. A little hidden feature you may not know is if you hold down RAW Max, it actually gives you more shooting options. So you can shoot in HEIF Max, which is a 48 megapixel HEIF option, which will give you high quality processed pictures, or RAW 12, which will give you a lower quality RAW image compared to RAW Max. I've drawn up a table for you to make this all a bit easier. Here's a few examples of a normal photo shot in 12 megapixel HEIF versus 48 megapixel RAW. As you can see, the RAW images are a lot more detailed, and if I zoom in, there's less pixelation on the RAW images due to a higher pixel density. Next to the RAW Max option, there's the option to turn live photos on and off, but it's important to remember that if you turn RAW on, it turns live photos off, so you have to decide which one you'd like at that point in time. Then, as you can see on the camera view itself, you've now got a 3x3 grid to help frame your shots more easily, and the macro control option is in the bottom left. This is useful because when you get close to your subject, your iPhone will normally automatically go into macro mode, so you can easily just turn that off from here if needed. Then, moving to the top left, you have the options to turn flash and night mode on and off. Just above the shutter button is where you find all your camera modes for capturing photo and video, and then your zoom options above those as well. When talking about zoom, it's important to understand what different cameras you have on your phone, and the difference between optical and digital zoom. On the iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 15, there are 3 rear cameras: a main wide-angle camera, an ultra-wide camera, and a telephoto camera, with 3 times optical zoom. And if you have an iPhone 15 Pro Max, the telephoto camera actually zooms in 5 times. Now, if we look at the zoom options on the phone, you'll see 0.5 times, 1, 2, and 3 times zoom. And the 0.5, 1, and 3 times zoom are optical zoom, whereas the 2 times zoom is digital zoom. And the difference between the two is that optical zoom uses the different physical lenses in the phone's 3 cameras to magnify the image, which helps maintain image quality because it doesn't involve any cropping or loss of detail. When you want to zoom out to 0.5 or zoom in to 3 times, the phone changes the physical camera it's using to produce that image. Digital zoom, on the other hand, is a software-based feature that magnifies the image by cropping and enlarging a portion of that picture. With digital zoom, the camera simply enlarges the pixels in the image, resulting in a loss of image quality. So when you want to zoom in 2 times, the phone is simply cropping the main camera's image, giving you a slightly lower quality photo. The same happens when you choose any zoom option other than 0.5, 1, and 3 times. That's why when taking pictures, I like to shoot at 1 or 3 times to make sure I'm only optically zooming into my subject and getting the highest quality image possible. You may not know this, but you can access more of your settings by swiping up on your screen or pressing the arrow at the top. This lets you access options like your flash, night mode, and live photos, aspect ratio, which I usually keep at 4:3, exposure, timer, and filters, which you may have guessed I keep off as well. Exposure is a really important option to consider because this can really make a difference to your photography. Exposure in photography refers to the amount of light that reaches the camera sensor when capturing an image, so it's important to adjust your exposure to the correct level depending on the environment you're shooting in. If you're outside and there's a lot of natural light, you may want to reduce the exposure, and if you're shooting indoors, then you may want to increase it slightly. If you adjust the exposure from this setting, it will stay at that level for the entire time you have the camera app open. So what I like to do instead is to adjust it for every picture I take. To do this, you just need to focus on your subject and then move the slider on the right, up, or down to adjust your exposure. The best way to improve at taking and editing pictures is just to take more shots in different environments, paying more attention to the settings and techniques you're using, and then using an app like Lightroom to play around with the editing settings. And the more you do that, the more you'll get used to it and improve. I hope you found my suggestions and techniques helpful, and if you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one.